The courtroom was silent as the defense attorney, Adam Hayes, stood at the podium, eyes fixed on the jury. It was the moment that could change everything, the moment that could either secure the freedom of a man wrongfully convicted of murder or prove that justice in this world was just an illusion. But as the prosecutor spoke, Adam couldn't shake the feeling that something else was at play here, something beyond the law. For weeks he'd been feeling it, a presence. It started small. Whispers in the halls, cold drafts in his office, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. At first, Adam chalked it up to stress, the kind that comes with handling a high-profile case like this one. But as the trial wore on, it became undeniable. He wasn't alone. The case he was defending was as difficult as they come. His client, Marcus Sinclair, had been convicted of murdering his wife 15 years ago, a crime he swore he didn't commit. But the evidence seemed irrefutable. The fingerprints, the DNA, the witnesses, everything pointed to Marcus. And yet, there was something about the case that didn't sit right with Adam. Something about the way the facts were laid out didn't match the man sitting in the defendant's chair. It wasn't until late one night, after a grueling day in court, that Adam experienced something that would change everything. Sitting alone in his office, going over case files, he felt a sudden drop in temperature. His breath turned to mist in the air as the lights flickered. He heard it, faint at first, almost like a whisper, but then louder, clearer. A voice. "I didn't kill her. Find the truth." The voice echoed through his mind, sending a chill down his spine. Adam looked around the empty room, heart pounding in his chest. He was alone, wasn't he? As the days passed, the mysterious occurrences grew more intense. Strange dreams, haunting visions of the courtroom, and more whispers urging him to continue digging into the case. It was impossible to ignore. The ghost of the man Marcus had been accused of killing, his wife, had come to Adam for a reason. But why him? What did the spirit want? With every step closer to uncovering the truth, Adam felt a weight on his shoulders. Someone didn't want the case to go any further, and they were willing to do whatever it took to make sure it didn't. Threats began arriving at his office, veiled warnings disguised as anonymous notes. People in high places were involved, people who would stop at nothing to keep the truth buried. The deeper Adam dug, the more dangerous it became. But the voice never stopped. The ghost never left him. As Adam stood in the courtroom that fateful day, trying to hold his ground against the prosecutor's relentless questioning, a new thought crept into his mind. What if he wasn't just fighting for justice for Marcus? What if, in some way, he was fighting for the ghost's peace as well? He couldn't back down. Not now. Not when the stakes were higher than he ever imagined. But as he glanced toward the jury, his eyes caught something that froze him in place. Someone in the back of the room. Someone who shouldn't have been there at all. And that's when Adam realized the real killer was still out there. Adam's heart raced as he locked eyes with the figure in the back of the courtroom. The man wasn't someone he recognized, and yet there was something eerily familiar about him. Dressed in a dark suit, his face obscured by the shadows, he stood motionless, watching Adam with an intensity that made his skin crawl. The room felt colder, even though the air conditioning was off. Adam tried to shake off the unease, refocusing on the task at hand. He had to maintain his composure, for Marcus's sake. The trial had already been a battle, one that had stretched Adam's patience and belief in the justice system to its limits. The evidence was stacked against Marcus, but Adam knew deep down that something was wrong. The testimony from witnesses didn't align with the facts. The police report had inconsistencies. And worst of all, there were no clear motives for Marcus to kill his wife. Marcus sat quietly at the defense table, his hands folded in front of him. His eyes were downcast, the weight of the world resting on his shoulders. He looked tired, as if years of fighting had drained him completely. But Adam knew that this was his last shot. If he couldn't prove Marcus's innocence now, he might never get another chance. "Your Honor," Adam began, his voice steady but strained, "I'd like to present evidence that was overlooked during the original investigation. Evidence that suggests someone else may have been responsible for the crime." The judge, an older man with a reputation for being hard-nosed, raised an eyebrow but nodded for Adam to continue. Adam glanced at the jury, each face a mask of indifference or confusion. He had to make them see what he saw, that Marcus didn't belong in prison. But as Adam began to speak, his mind kept drifting back to the figure in the back of the room. His gut twisted. He couldn't shake the feeling that something far more dangerous was lurking behind the scenes. Later that night, Adam returned to his apartment, his mind a whirlpool of questions. Who was that man? Why had he been in the courtroom? And what did he want? He tried to brush it off, focusing instead on the case. The ghost's voice had been louder than ever that day, more insistent. Find the truth, it whispered. But what truth? The case seemed as straightforward as any, until the ghost got involved. Sitting at his kitchen table, Adam reviewed the case files once again. As he flipped through the pages, he was reminded of the haunting details that didn't sit right. There was the strange behavior of the investigators, who seemed oddly uninterested in pursuing leads that didn't fit their narrative. There was the missing footage from a security camera near the crime scene, footage that had never been found despite multiple searches. And then, there was the odd testimony of the key witness, the victim's best friend, who had provided a shaky alibi for Marcus, but who had later been found with a significant sum of unexplained money just days after the murder. Adam ran his hands through his hair. There was something here, something deeper, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. The ghost had been adamant that the truth was still hidden, but what did that mean for him? Why now? And why was it happening to him? Suddenly, there was a knock at his door. Adam froze. It was late, too late for visitors. He cautiously approached the door and peered through the peephole. No one was there. His breath caught as he looked down at the floor. A small, weathered envelope sat on the doormat, its edges crinkled and worn. With a sense of dread creeping up his spine, Adam bent down to pick it up. As he opened it, a single sheet of paper fell out. You're getting too close, Adam. Let it go. The truth will destroy you. His pulse quickened. Who had sent this? And what did they mean by the truth will destroy you? Adam stood there, the words burning in his mind. He looked around his apartment, as if expecting someone to jump out from the shadows. But there was nothing. Only the faint echo of the ghost's voice, urging him to keep going. Adam's instincts screamed at him to back off. But he couldn't. Not when he knew, deep in his bones, that the ghost, Marcus's wife, was telling him the truth. Something was terribly wrong, and the deeper he went, the darker the forces seemed to become. With a deep breath, Adam gathered his courage and headed back to the case files. The game had changed. The stakes had grown higher, and he was about to uncover a truth that no one was prepared for. The next few days passed in a blur of tension. Adam could hardly concentrate on anything other than the case, the mysterious envelope, and the eerie feeling that seemed to follow him wherever he went. The ghost's presence lingered like a heavy fog, creeping into his thoughts even when he tried to push it away. And now, with the warning ringing in his ears, he couldn't ignore it any longer. Someone didn't want him to find the truth. That evening, after another grueling day in court, Adam drove to a quiet diner on the edge of town. He needed to clear his head. He sat at a booth by the window, absently stirring his coffee as he watched the rain streaking down the glass. The dim lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the empty tables. It was as if the whole town was holding its breath. His mind kept returning to the figure in the courtroom. It was more than just the chilling feeling he'd had. There was something about that man's presence that felt like a warning. Adam had tried to brush it off, but his gut told him that figure was connected to everything. Marcus, the case, and the ghost. As Adam sat lost in thought, his phone buzzed, jolting him back to reality. He glanced at the screen, an unknown number. His heart skipped. "Hello, Mr. Hayes," came a raspy voice on the other end. "I'm sure you've figured it out by now. You're getting too close to something you don't understand." The voice was cold, but there was something else behind it. Something Adam couldn't quite place. A subtle fear or perhaps desperation. It sent a shiver down his spine. "Who is this?" Adam demanded, his pulse quickening. The voice chuckled darkly. "You'll know soon enough. But it won't matter. The truth is already sealed." If you keep digging, it will cost you more than you realize. Before Adam could respond, the line went dead. He stared at his phone, his hands trembling. The threat was unmistakable, but there was something else in the words. Something that didn't sit right. Felt personal. The kind of personal a criminal would feel when they were cornered. The voice wasn't just trying to intimidate him. It was trying to protect something. Adam stood up abruptly, his mind racing. He had no idea what was going on. But he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't backing down. He couldn't. Not when the stakes were this high. He owed it to Marcus. He owed it to the ghost. The next morning, Adam took the bold step of visiting the crime scene again. The house where Marcus's wife had been murdered was still standing, abandoned and covered in overgrown ivy. It looked desolate, as though time had forgotten it. But as he approached the front door, the feeling of being watched hit him again, sharper this time. He paused, scanning the surrounding area. Nothing. He stepped inside. The house was still. The air was thick with dust and stale memories. He walked through the empty rooms, taking in every detail, every possible clue that might have been missed the first time. But there was nothing. No hidden messages. No forgotten evidence. Just a haunting silence. But then, as he reached the stairs leading to the second floor, Adam froze. A small piece of paper had been tucked under the banister. He carefully picked it up, unfolding it with trembling hands. "You're too late. It's already over." The same handwriting as the note from the night before. His mind raced. How had it gotten here? Who was watching him? As Adam stood there, trying to make sense of it, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a text message. He quickly opened it. "Stop. You're not safe. Leave this alone or you'll regret it." The message was unsigned, but it didn't matter. Adam's blood ran cold. Whoever was behind this was desperate. They wanted him to stop, to walk away. But why? The tension in the pit of his stomach grew as he realized just how deep this went. This wasn't just about Marcus's case anymore. This was about something far bigger, something far darker. He wasn't just chasing a killer. He was getting closer to something that had been hidden, something dangerous. Later that night, Adam found himself unable to sleep. The shadows in his apartment felt heavier now, like they were closing in around him. The ghost's voice echoed in his mind once again. Find the truth. But Adam couldn't help but wonder. What if the truth wasn't what he expected? What if uncovering it meant losing everything? He had no answers, only questions. And yet, the pull to continue, to uncover what had been buried for so long, was irresistible. The next morning, Adam arranged to meet with Marcus. They sat across from each other in the stark, fluorescent-lit meeting room of the prison, separated by thick glass. Marcus looked the same as always, defeated, resigned to his fate. But Adam could see the flicker of hope in his eyes, the hope that maybe, just maybe, someone believed he was innocent. "I've been thinking about the case," Adam began, his voice low, careful. "There's something I need to ask you. I know you've said you didn't kill your wife, but is there anything you haven't told me? Anything you might have forgotten? Something you've been afraid to say?" Marcus's eyes darted away, his jaw tightening. "I've told you everything," he muttered. "I don't know what else to say." But as Adam watched him, he couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus was hiding something. Something important. The silence between them grew heavy, suffocating. And just before Adam could press him further, the door to the room opened, and a guard stepped in. The moment was over. As Adam left the prison, the weight of the unanswered questions hung over him like a storm cloud. Someone didn't want the truth to come out. But who? And why? The closer he got to the heart of the case, the more it became clear. This wasn't just about justice. It was about survival. The days following his meeting with Marcus felt like they were pulling Adam deeper into a vortex of uncertainty. Every step he took seemed to bring him closer to something he couldn't fully grasp. Some truth that hung just out of reach. The phone calls, the messages, the cryptic warnings, and now the feeling that someone was always just behind him, watching. Each night, Adam lay awake in the dark, replaying every conversation, every encounter, and every piece of evidence. It was as if his mind was unraveling, trying to make sense of the impossible. The pieces didn't fit, and the more he tried to align them, the further he seemed to be from the truth. The case felt like a twisted puzzle, with edges that didn't match, and someone powerful, was doing everything they could to prevent him from solving it. But then, late one evening, as Adam sifted through another stack of old case files in his office, he found something. A photograph, tucked between two yellowed pages, showing Marcus's wife, Catherine, standing outside their house, laughing with a man Adam had never seen before. The man was tall, dark-haired, with a look in his eyes that made Adam's stomach tighten. It wasn't just the casual nature of the photograph. It was the way they were standing, too close, too familiar. Adam felt a surge of adrenaline. Why had this been overlooked? And why hadn't Marcus mentioned it? He stared at the photo for a long time, his mind racing. Could it be? Had Marcus been lying about his wife's death? Or was it something more sinister? Something tied to this man in the photo? The more Adam thought about it, the more the pieces began to shift. The strange behavior of the key witness, the best friend who'd given an alibi and then disappeared, the missing security footage, the warnings, all of it started to align in a way that felt like a trap. But a trap for who? That night, the ghost returned. Not in whispers, but in sharp, clear visions. Flashes of Catherine's face, her eyes wide in terror, and a figure standing over her, obscured by shadows. It was brief, but it was enough. Adam could feel it in his bones. The ghost wasn't just trying to speak through him anymore. She was trying to warn him. There was more to this case than he realized. The next morning, Adam arranged to meet with Detective Roberts, the investigator who'd worked on the original case. Roberts had been one of the few people who believed in Marcus's innocence, but something had always felt off about him. Maybe it was the way he had pulled back from the investigation so quickly after Marcus's conviction, or maybe it was the nervous glances he'd given whenever the case came up. Whatever it was, Adam couldn't shake the suspicion that Roberts knew more than he was letting on. When they met in a small coffee shop on the outskirts of town, Roberts was already there, sitting at a corner table. He looked tense, his eyes darting to the door every few seconds, as though expecting someone to walk in. "Adam, you look like you've seen a ghost," Roberts said. His voice strained as he motioned for Adam to sit. Adam didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I need to know everything you found out about Catherine's death. I know there's something you're not telling me. Who's the man in the photograph?" Roberts stiffened. His lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment he seemed to hesitate. "That photo, I thought it was lost. We never could figure out who he was. But you're not going to like the answer, Adam. The man in the photo isn't just some stranger. He's someone very close to the case. Someone who was part of the original investigation." Adam felt his pulse quicken. Who is he?" Roberts leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "The man in that photo is Detective David Sloan." Adam's blood ran cold. Sloan had been one of the lead investigators. But why hadn't he been mentioned in the case files? Why wasn't he a part of the official record? Before Adam could speak, Roberts quickly looked over his shoulder, as though someone might be listening. "You need to stop. This whole thing, it's deeper than you think. If you go any further, you're playing with fire. Some people aren't going to let you take the lid off this." The tension in the room was suffocating, and Adam could feel it tightening around his chest. Everything inside him screamed to press Roberts further, to dig into Sloan's past, to find out what connection he had to the case. But Roberts was right about one thing: the deeper Adam went, the more dangerous it became. Every lead, every clue, seemed to draw him closer to a dark, terrifying truth that wasn't just about Marcus or the murder. It was about something bigger, a conspiracy that reached far beyond this small town, and people who would do anything to keep it buried. As Adam left the cafe, his thoughts were clouded with a growing sense of dread. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The ghost's whispers had grown louder, more urgent. "Find the truth," she urged. But what if the truth wasn't something he could live with? Later that night, Adam's phone rang again. This time, it wasn't an anonymous call, but the familiar voice of someone he hadn't heard from in months. His old colleague, Sarah. "I've been watching your case, Adam," she said, her voice low. "You're in over your head. There's something you need to know, something about Sloan." Before she could say more, the line went dead. Adam stood frozen, the weight of the past few weeks crashing down on him all at once. He wasn't sure who to trust anymore, or who was playing him. But one thing was clear: the truth was closer than ever, and the danger had never been greater. He was running out of time. The phone call ended with a sharp click, and for a long moment, Adam stood frozen, staring at the screen. His mind reeled with the implication of Sarah's words, or more accurately, the lack of them. The silence after the call hung in the air like a heavy fog. Someone didn't want him to know the truth about Sloan. But why? And what did Sarah know that was worth cutting the call short for? Adam's pulse quickened, his thoughts racing. He had never felt more isolated, more hunted. The deeper he dug into this case, the more it felt like he was unearthing something that was meant to stay buried forever. He needed answers, and the only person who could provide them, it seemed, was Sarah. But with her sudden disappearance, things had just become even more complicated. The next day, Adam drove to Sarah's apartment. It wasn't far, just a few blocks from his own. But as he neared her place, a creeping unease settled over him. The building was old, the kind of place that looked like it had seen better days, with cracked windows and peeling paint. As Adam approached her door, he noticed something strange. The hallway light flickered, casting long, jagged shadows across the floor. He knocked, his fist falling against the door with a loud thud. But there was no answer. He knocked again, louder this time, and then tried the handle. Locked. He stepped back, scanning the hallway. Something felt off. It wasn't just Sarah's absence. It was the way the whole place seemed to be holding its breath. There was no sound at all, not even the hum of a refrigerator or the muffled conversation of neighbors. He tried calling her again, but this time it went straight to voicemail. That sinking feeling in his stomach was back. He wasn't sure if it was the case or the mounting sense of dread that was clouding his thoughts, but something told him he was too late. Just as he turned to leave, Adam noticed something out of the corner of his eye. A small piece of paper stuck under the doorframe. He bent down, carefully pulling it out. The handwriting was frantic, rushed. "Don't trust Sloan. He's the key. You're too close. They'll come for you next." The note was barely legible, and yet the message was clear. Adam's heart pounded in his chest as he pocketed the paper. He had been warned before, but this felt different. This felt like a countdown. Instinctively, Adam reached for his phone and checked the time. It was getting late. Too late to be running around in a haze of confusion. He needed to take action. But where to go? Sarah had just hinted at something bigger than Marcus's case, something involving Sloan. But how deep did the rabbit hole go? With one last glance at the apartment door, Adam turned and walked briskly to his car. He needed to get to the bottom of this, and fast. The last piece of the puzzle was slipping further out of reach, and the people behind the curtain were tightening their grip. As he drove through the rain-slicked streets, his mind returned to the cryptic text messages he had received from Sarah. "Don't trust Sloan. He's the key." He had known for a while that something wasn't right about Sloan. The detective had been evasive, his presence in the investigation too close to the truth. But what if Sloan wasn't just involved? What if he was the mastermind? What if the whole investigation had been manipulated from the start? Adam's thoughts were interrupted by the sudden screech of tires. His car swerved, narrowly avoiding a black SUV that came out of nowhere, cutting him off on the road. He slammed on the brakes, heart pounding, as the SUV sped away into the night. The driver didn't even look back. Adam took a deep breath, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. That wasn't a coincidence. Someone had just tried to run him off the road. He could feel it now. He was being hunted. The deeper he dug, the more desperate they became. He knew he had to make a decision. Go after Sloan and risk uncovering the darkest secret of all, or step away, protecting his own life and Marcus's, while the system continued to spin its lies. His car screeched to a halt in front of the police station. The familiar building stood in front of him like a fortress, but this time, it felt like the walls were closing in. He stepped out, his every move now filled with urgency. The questions burned inside him. What had happened to Sarah? Why was Sloane so desperate to keep him away from the truth? He approached the front door, but just as he reached for the handle, a figure stepped out of the shadows, blocking his way. Adam froze. It was the same man he had seen in the courtroom, standing at the back, watching him with cold, unreadable eyes. Not a good idea, Hayes, the man said, his voice low, laced with an unmistakable threat. You're digging in the wrong place. Adam's heart skipped a beat. His instincts screamed to turn and run, but he stood his ground. Who are you? Adam demanded, his voice steady despite the fear creeping in. The man's lips curled into a thin smile, but there was no warmth in it. The question isn't who I am. The question is, how much are you willing to lose to find the truth? The man stepped back into the shadows, leaving Adam standing alone in the rain-soaked night, with more questions than ever before. Adam's heart pounded as he watched the man vanish into the shadows, leaving him alone in the rain. His mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. How much are you willing to lose to find the truth? The words echoed in his head, a chilling reminder of the danger he was in. But there was no turning back now. He had come too far to walk away, and with Sarah missing, he was more certain than ever that Sloane was at the heart of this twisted conspiracy. Without hesitation, Adam pushed open the doors to the police station. The lobby was nearly empty, save for a few uniformed officers at their desks. It was eerily quiet, and Adam couldn't shake the feeling that the building itself was holding its breath. He walked past the front desk without so much as a glance, heading straight for the hallway that led to the detective's offices. He knew what he needed to do. He had to confront Sloane. But as he approached the door to Sloane's office, a sharp pain shot through his chest. Adam staggered, gripping the wall for support. He looked down and saw blood staining his shirt. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough to send a wave of panic crashing through him. Someone had hurt him. Someone who didn't want him to reach Sloane. Are you looking for something, Hayes? A voice said from behind him. Adam turned slowly. Standing in the doorway of the office was Sloane, his face impassive, his eyes cold. You're too late, Sloane said, stepping forward. You've been digging in the wrong place all along. Adam took a step back, the world spinning around him. His mind raced, trying to put everything together. The warning messages, the cryptic calls, the attempt on his life. It all led to Sloane. But why? Why go to such lengths to protect the truth? I don't understand, Adam gasped, trying to steady himself. What's the point of all this? Who are you protecting? Sloane smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It's not about protecting anyone. It's about keeping control. You see, Marcus isn't the only one who's been framed. The truth is far darker than you realize. You've uncovered a piece of the puzzle, Hayes, but it's only the beginning. Adam's head spun as the words sank in. What do you mean? Sloane took a slow step forward, his eyes narrowing. You think this is about a murder trial? About Marcus's innocence? No, it's about power, about control of this entire town. Your precious case? It's just a smokescreen. Adam's mind raced. He had suspected that something was off about the case. But this was beyond anything he had imagined. I didn't kill anyone, Sloane said, his voice low and menacing. I've spent years making sure the right people stayed out of prison. The right people stayed in power. But you, Hayes, you've ruined everything. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The missing footage, the odd behavior of the witnesses, the manipulations of the investigation, it had all been orchestrated. Sloane had been part of a larger web, one that included corrupt officials, dirty cops, and people who would stop at nothing to protect their empire. And Marcus was just a pawn in a much larger game. Adam struggled to stay upright as Sloane continued. You think I framed Marcus? No. He was an inconvenience. He didn't need to die, but sometimes sacrifices are necessary to maintain control. The truth hit Adam like a freight train. Sloane hadn't just been involved in covering up a murder. He was the architect of a conspiracy that went far deeper than he could have imagined. The people he trusted, the officers, the investigators, had all been complicit. The entire town was under Sloane's thumb, and Adam was now standing in the middle of it. But then, something unexpected happened. Sloane's face twitched, his confident demeanor faltering for a brief second. Adam saw it, the glimmer of fear. "You don't know everything, Hayes," Sloane spat, his voice rising in anger. "You think you're the only one who's been playing this game? Think again." Adam's heart raced as the realization struck him. There was still something Sloane wasn't telling him. Something bigger, something even more dangerous. But before he could react, the door to the office burst open. A group of officers rushed in, guns drawn, surrounding Adam. "Sloane," one of them shouted. "We have him. It's over." Adam blinked in disbelief. What was happening? Was this a trick? Was this the end of the game? Or was it just the beginning of something even darker? Sloane's face twisted in fury, but there was no escape. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he hissed. "You've made a mistake." But it wasn't Adam who had made the mistake. As the officers moved to arrest Sloane, another figure emerged from the shadows. It was Sarah. She stepped into the room, her expression grim, her eyes locked on Sloane. She was holding a file, one Adam recognized. It was the final piece of the puzzle, the evidence that would bring everything crashing down. "Sloane's not the only one you've been underestimating," Sarah said, her voice cold and unwavering. "I've been working on this case from the inside. I've been feeding you just enough to get you to the truth. But now it's time to finish what we started." Sloane's face went pale as Sarah handed the file to one of the officers. The officer opened it, revealing documents that linked Sloane to not only the murder of Catherine, but a vast network of illegal operations and bribes that reached all the way to the highest levels of law enforcement. Adam stood there, stunned, as the reality of everything he had just uncovered sank in. But as Sarah looked at him, there was something in her eyes, a hint of sorrow, maybe regret. "You don't understand, Adam," she said softly. "This isn't over. Not yet." And just like that, the ground beneath Adam's feet shifted again. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. As the officers led Sloane away, Adam's mind raced with the realization that the truth was far more complex than he had ever imagined. And somewhere in the shadows, someone else was watching. As the officers led Sloane away, his face twisted in a silent snarl. Adam felt an odd sense of closure settle over him. It wasn't the kind of victory he had imagined. There was no final moment of triumph, no applause or accolades. Instead, it was a quiet realization that the case had come to an end, but the truth had come at a far greater cost than he had anticipated. Sarah stood by his side, her expression unreadable as she watched Sloane disappear into the back of the police van. She had helped him get to this point, had played the dangerous game from the inside, but Adam couldn't shake the sense that there was still so much more to her story, and that not everything had been revealed. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Adam asked, his voice a mixture of confusion and gratitude. "Why the games, the secrets?" Sarah turned to him, her eyes heavy with the burden of the past. "I couldn't. It was too risky. If Sloane had known I was working against him, it would have meant the end for both of us." She paused, her gaze flickering to the empty parking lot outside. "And honestly, Adam, I wasn't sure I could trust you." Adam absorbed her words, the weight of her decisions settling in his chest. There had been moments when he had doubted her, when he had wondered if he was being played, just another pawn in a much larger scheme. But now, standing here, he understood. She had risked everything for the truth, for justice, even if it meant walking a tightrope between friend and foe. "So, what happens now?" Adam asked quietly. Sarah gave him a small, almost sad smile. "We go after the rest." Sloane was just the tip of the iceberg. He was the enforcer, the muscle. The ones who pulled the strings are still out there. Her voice dropped lower, like a secret she wasn't ready to share. "The system is more corrupt than you can imagine, Adam. But we're not done yet." Adam nodded, the sense of dread creeping back in. As much as he wanted to think that Sloane's arrest would bring an end to the darkness that had clouded his life, he knew Sarah was right. The fight was far from over. A week later, Adam sat in his office, staring at the pile of case files in front of him. Marcus's case had been overturned. The truth had come to light, and the wrongful conviction was finally corrected. But for every victory, there was a shadow, another piece of the puzzle that was just out of reach. The weight of everything he had uncovered still hung over him. He had thought that solving Marcus's case would be the end of it. But instead, it had opened the door to a much larger conspiracy. One that went beyond just the town, beyond just Sloane. He realized now that it wasn't about finding closure. It was about confronting a system that would do anything to keep its secrets hidden. The phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. He glanced at the caller ID. It was Sarah. "Adam," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "We've got more. You need to see this." His heart skipped a beat. The game was still on, and this time it was bigger than either of them had ever anticipated. Adam could feel the tension building again, like the calm before a storm. But now he was ready. He wasn't the same person who had walked into this mess a few months ago. He had uncovered the truth, and despite the danger that loomed, he knew he couldn't stop now. "I'm on my way," he said, hanging up the phone. As he grabbed his coat and stepped out into the cold night, Adam realized something profound. In the end, justice wasn't just about uncovering the truth. It was about the courage to keep fighting, no matter how deep the corruption ran, no matter how high the stakes became. The battle for justice was just beginning, and Adam was ready to face whatever came next.